Welcome everybody, welcome to Clay Arts Centre. We're here tonight with Adero Willard, and my name is Regina Farrell-Fagan, and I'm the Exhibitions Manager at Clay Arts Centre. I'm going to hand it over to Adero now in 1 second. She's based in Massachusetts. Right now she's a visiting professor at Alfred College. She was recently a professor for many years at Holyoke Community College in Massachusetts, but she's at Alfred right now and will be for the next year or so. And she recently had an exhibition in Boston Sculpture Gallery called Passages. And she also showed with Clay Arts Centre in our Concepts in Clay exhibition, which was online and is still available to view on our website. So Adero, I'm going to hand it over to you. I know people are excited to hear from you tonight.
So hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be here today. I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes or so sharing with you my journey as an artist and the influences as well as the meaningful events that have changed the path of the work that I make over a number of years. And I hope that you, throughout this, that you can jot down some questions that you might have for me. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and start from the beginning. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to have a number of quotes. So I'm going to start with this quote from Toni Morrison. Make up a story for our sake and yours. Forget your name in the street. Tell us what the world has been to you in the dark places and in the light. So I grew up in New York as I was the only child of a single parent in New York City in the 70s and 80s. And Manhattan at that time was a quirky city of buildings built on a grid. I'm influenced by the beauty and the organization of the grid and the map of the streets with small businesses and people of all kinds, as well as an abundance of art. So there's just a lot of beauty, a lot of different kinds of architecture, a lot of different kinds of businesses, as opposed to now where there's so much more of the, the Starbucks and the things that you see on every street. Due to a high rate at the time in the 70s and 80s, to high rates of unemployment, homelessness, major drug epidemics, racism, and financial inequity, New York City at the same time was also a very chaotic place full of seediness and danger. So these are sort of some of the things you might see just walking down the street in certain parts of the city. There were also beautiful green spaces, protected spaces like this image taken in Central Park, where I could find some solace and respite and re-energize. And it's a love of these green spaces that still become a respite and a great teacher for ideas of chaos and order. Liminal space. Liminal is a concept in my work, both through formal ideas of design and personal ideas of identity and sense of self. I am interested in the layers of variables that happen as nature intersects in our world, and how that presents a sense of chaos and order, and the space in between. Just like here, like the vines are using this building as a structure, while at the same time potentially breaking down the structure. I like to play with the idea of the spaces in between, this kind of imagery of order, of organization and chaos. And the topic of liminal space at a show at the Cambridge Arts, the topic of liminal space at a show at Cambridge Art Association in Cambridge, Mass. says, the use of the word liminal lends itself to extending beyond the physical and into a variety of themes, focusing on what space truly is. Liminal space can be locations of transition. It can be a space that closes and reopens, or liminal space can be events that are largely transitional and leave us lingering between the past and the future. So growing up as an only child in New York City of a single parent, the other challenge and confusion of those times was growing up as a Black child of a white parent. I struggled alone with the concepts of interracial, being half of. These ideas brought a lot of loneliness and anger, finding myself in confusing liminal in-between space, in between white and Black and struggling with seeing myself as being between cultures that were often violently at odds. I talk a lot about identity because it has been constantly questioned and pointed out, whether I've wanted it to or not. I now see that as a way to bring on conversations with people about race and identity, and I think it is an important thing to happen now. And there's a quote from Angela Drakeford where she talks about this idea. When people are having conversations about racial identities, they seem to make an exception to my Blackness and not as someone who is Black, and deny that Blackness represents a multitude of identities. And Angela Drakeford, this was a quote from her presentation that she gave at Alfred, and she's a sculpture artist. Understanding the complexities of being a Black woman and a woman of color took a journey of self-exploration. Reading and conversations with different people over my young adult life. This is a recent picture. This is a more recent picture of my father, and it is with him that I learned through stories and images about the history of my family, a complex history that includes people of all different skin colors. So I went to my undergraduate study at Alfred University. I got my BFA from Alfred University, and I'm back here. So it's been kind of a strange experience of walking through halls, being an artist who's been out of Alfred for over 25 years, but then kind of running into the ghosts of the person who I was at that time occasionally. So these are the closest pots I could find to the pots I was making while at undergrad. These are actually pots I was making just out of undergrad. So I was working with high fire. This is stoneware, and I was doing a lot of carving where the carving actually, through the carving would actually press through to the inside. And so I've always been interested in this like idea of surface decoration. And at this time it was through texture. After undergraduate school, I went to Mudflat Pottery Studio in Somerville, Massachusetts. And it was a really important place for me to land after undergraduate, because it gave me a sense of community. It also allowed me to grow as an artist and become a technician and then a teacher, and kind of find a place of community and really kind of explore the work that I wanted to make. So I started making pots. I continued making pots, and this is a example of some of the work I was making. This is Conten porcelain layered with glazes. I was also starting to explore these kind of quirky pots where I was stacking and kind of playing with surface decoration that would kind of go from the back to the front. So these are an oval set of stacking storage jars, and these kind of odd quirky forms where I wasn't quite sure what was going on here, but I was trying to like figure out something beyond what kind of production pottery was presenting to me. So I decided at that point of that sort of struggle to figure out what I was doing and why I was making the work that I was making, and to go to graduate school. And I went to Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in Halifax, Nova Scotia in 2004. And during that time, this is an example of a tile wall from my MFA thesis show. And I titled my MFA show Peel and Resist, to express an idea about the interplay between a flat surface, the imagined space inside, and the actual physical space of form. This also presented an important way to talk about identity as an abstract idea with fluctuating and undulating layers. These layers are at times perceived as surface, while other times residing below the surface. So these are all actually 11 by 10. This is not a great image. I pulled this from slides that I had and had them made into digital images. So the next few images are a little bit because of the transformation from slide to digital. But I decided to focus I ended up deciding to focus on decoration and ornamentation as a central element of my research and develop a personal visual language. And so I display a catalog of an exploration of this language of ornamentation in these tiles. Each one is different while reflecting on another tile in that same space. The display is of two-dimensional space, but when looked at closely, reflects the potential for exploration of three-dimensional space. How the shapes of pattern may be hidden beneath the layer, at times visible, and at other times beneath the surface. So these are all made through, like, this is a sgraffiti. This is the grid actually the grid on this is inlaid into a cone 6 porcelain. That's the temperature and the body of clay I was using. And then shellac, a shellac resist is how the vines are made. So at other times, some of my tiles would express actual layering of structural ornament. So these are layered through slabs, these next couple of tiles. And so I kind of see these as a catalog. I see, like, yeah, this tile wall is a catalog, kind of a toolkit, a tool case of ideas and exploration that I then took through the next years that has kind of brought me to the work that I make today. Alongside the flat tiles, I developed these three-dimensional forms made up of decoration as structure. So these are slabs that are used with cutouts and then layered on top. Literally building with the clay slab to create these shapes. The coexistence of flat and three-dimensional work residing in the same space as a gallery. I think that in this show, I was kind of exploring the vessel as, like, talking about vessel and function, like in this piece. And other times sort of like really pushing what platter could be in this piece. This is a fairly large piece. I'm not sure exactly dimensions, but it's a really fairly large piece. I also started working with these pillow shapes that are also made from these slab cutout shapes to express the fluidity of clay and form, as well as a metaphor for the fluidity of our memory, which is like a dream, layered and always fluctuating. So the sort of this idea of, like, dream, memory, subconscious, or consciousness as these fluctuating layers that kind of pull us between identity, reality, our past, our present, our future. And so these are a number of these pillows. And then finally in my show, I made these abstract three-dimensional freestanding sculptures. These are made out of paper clay, also at cone 6. And I wanted these to be free formed forms, ambiguous, and taking on their structure in an intuitive process. So I kind of allowed the structure to sort of form, using my own kind of intuition to sort of guide it, but letting the form be created by these slabs these shapes that I would cut out, like literally building with ornament was the way I was trying to look at these. So the coexistence of flat and the three-dimensional work is a metaphor for the way we experience each other. And this is from my thesis. So we often create simple, flat impressions of one another. It is not until we are open enough that the story becomes more complex. The exchanges between people can be both fulfilling and messy. Every time we become open to someone, we experience change. So then after graduate school, I went to Watershed Center for Ceramic Art in Newcastle, Maine. And if you haven't been to Watershed, I really recommend going there. It is one of the most, I find it, in terms of my experience, such a great place for ceramics. It fully, like, supports ceramics and creates this, like, beautiful, like, supportive bubble for creativity and community. So that when I was there, I was actually there for a year-long residency as what's called the Salad Days artist. And the Salad Days residency is still going on today, although I'm not sure during COVID, but where someone is chosen to make 500 plates for their fundraising event in July. And so I had a year to make 500 plates. I think now it's a summer. And you can basically choose how you want to make the plates, what kinds of colors, or however you want to make those. But at the time, the one thing that was part of that was that you used the watershed clay. And this is the clay hill where you could dig the brick clay and create and make your own kind of watershed clay. And so I also decided at the same time to move all of my Cone 6 work to Cone 04, and alongside the Salad Days plates, make my work at that temperature. And so this is an example of the Salad Days plates. This is the image that was used in the postcard, and each of these plates shows an example of kind of a theme of 25 to 50 plates that I was exploring at the time. So the first plate in the front I made like 25 to 50 plates within this theme, kind of playing with that like split lip and ruffled edge, and then that color, and then the next plate would be another. So this is a kind of a representation of the exploration that I was doing. And so I was kind of using this time as a collaboration between Watershed and this research that I wanted to do between like terracotta color and pattern, and then also this exploration of these edges that I kind of saw as creating a layer as well, sort of talking about what a layer is within the clay itself. And these are two layers. So the color layer that you see is actually the first layer that is put down, and then there's a wax shape that's I hand paint on, and then these are dipped in a slip to create that second kind of white layer. And so during that time, I was trying to figure out how to make Cone 04 terracotta work using the Watershed brick clay. And so these are some of the early examples of that work. And so these are two layers of surface. So the white layer on the left is the first layer, and then the vines are waxed in, and then the red is put on top. And then dividing up space on the right side and using sgraffito to create the grid. One of the things that I found really, I still am totally in love with is that going from, up until this point, I had been using white clay or stoneware clay, and I really fell in love with this red clay as the background, this dark kind of red clay, which I think of clay in general as the skin of the pot that I build up from. And so in looking at how color sits on the red clay, it really creates this, like, for me, this really rich depth that comes off of building color off of that red clay base. And so these are two layers of color using wax resist. All right, so this quote from Toni Morrison, I'm going to talk about some other work that I was making. Some things you forget, other things you never do, but it's not. Places are still there. If a house burns down, it's gone, but the place, the picture of it stays, and not just in my memory, but out there in the world. What I remember is a picture floating around out there outside my head. I mean, even if I die, the picture of what I did or knew or saw is still out there, right in the place where it happened. And I wrote some of the quotes I have in the presentation because this one is sort of complex, and so I wanted you to be able to read it. I think it's just a really beautiful quote from Beloved. So this is a picture of my grandmother, my father's mother, and she died when she was 18 years old, and my father was 4. My aunt was 2. She died in a fire going into going in to save her children. And so this is someone I've never known. My father's has a very loose, distant, even if maybe not even a memory of who she is. But this picture has been in our family and in my life for so long. And so she kind of resides alongside me in many places, as this idea of like kind of what is lost and ghosts and history, imagined histories, which I think is very like, it's this thing that that I feel like I pull towards at certain points in my life. And so I started building at Watershed Center for Ceramic Arts. I started also building these pillows. And this is actually a stoneware pillow that was in a wood firing. And I made this in honor of my grandmother, my father's mother. And so I made these series of pillows. Sorry, I skipped it. I made these series of pillows based on histories, my own histories and connections to people. And so one of those things is a travel to India when I was 11. My mother was part of a place, a spiritual center called Siddha Yoga. And we would go to an ashram in New York City and in the Catskills, but she decided to go on a pilgrimage to India, and she took me, and I had this like amazing experience, this overwhelming experience that I've carried with me my entire life, of this color, this beauty of color, people wearing beautiful cloth, even just casually, this fabric, and then also being something that I sometimes talk about and sometimes I don't, but being a 11-year-old brown kid that had never kind of experienced what it was like to be in a place where I was like fully accepted. Like I was people, like the other children thought I was Indian, and it was just an interesting experience to like have a connection to a place in that way. But also like how fully ornate everything was. Like you would go into a temple and every single space had ornamentation, flowers and carving, and just like no space left undecorated. This is a piece of fabric that I have that's representative of this work that I really love. It's from Rajasthan, and these are made from wedding dresses that have been salvaged from this work. This is like very like old tribal work. It's all hand stitched, every single part of this. So these are all kind of pieces that have been salvaged in order to protect and save this this type of work that is is either not being made or is harder to be made today. So I have a number of pieces like this. And so I made this pillow called wedding dresses. And I love this idea that the wedding in India and in other cultures as well is very colorful and flamboyantly like celebration of color, as opposed, like I like that so much more than the way that sometimes we celebrate it here with a white wedding. This is a pillow I call her Peony. It's based on my mother's mother, who was alive. Her life was in the 50s, and so she was a very she had dreams of so many doing so many different things, a career, and in the end she ended up kind of really being pressured to be a housewife and raising children. And so within that space she did end up really putting a lot of love and attention towards the domestic space. And I learned a lot about how to be proud and how to kind of the creativity that goes into that space. And she had these peonies that she really was so proud of. And so I think of this piece as also talking about that, as well as in a lot of cultures, in Indian culture, at death you wear white. And so I wanted to sort of talk about that cultural difference, as well as like you can see some of the colors coming through this piece. So this idea of things kind of traveling through from the from different layers through that. And then finally, the last pillow, it's not the last slide in the presentation, but the last pillow is based on my Aunt Rosalie, who, so these pillows I think a lot like matriarch, sort of connections to the matriarchal people in my life. And so my Aunt Rosalie was a very important person in a certain time in my life where she really brought the entire family together. So I have brothers and sisters from my father who I didn't know that well or didn't know, and she brought us together and we're a family now. And she actually died really way too young, in her late 50s or early 60s. And she just had an exuberance and about her that was really infectious and inspiring. So I've made this pillow based on her. So this work kind of has that resonant space for me. And so the other thing that I'm looking at is textiles. Sorry, just looking at the time. So from different places, textiles from all sorts of different places, different types of textiles, different ways that textiles are made. This is a quilt that I actually own from this woman that I met in Maine, a 90-year-old woman who was sewing her entire life from when she was a child. She worked in a factory sewing, and she did that her entire life. And in her old age, she made all these beautiful quilts. So I just like this lineage that textiles can have, as well as this like kind of collaging of fabric. The other thing that is really inspiring, or that I reflect upon, I guess, in my work are these spaces that I grew up around, where every space, that is full of information. But it's also dissected space because of the way that the windows are set up and the way signs are presented. And I also think the colors here, you'll see, I think I use a lot of these kind of primary colors and bright colors in my work, as well as like how signs divide up space, how architecture and signs, or how like people are kind of sit within a space that maybe has some chaos as well as order, like on the right side. And then again, just this like really this collaboration between the city and in between nature reclaiming the city, or the like sort of this push-pull between the two. And then Ramir Bearden is a very someone that I've looked at and continue to go back to in the way that he uses collage and the division of space. So the way that doorway, the way that the use of domestic space, the doorway, also how he talks about in terms of the Harlem Renaissance, artists were talking about Black people in domestic space, something that hadn't been really talked or shown in fine arts. So finally, some work. These are some pieces that I made, that I've been making, but kind of wanted to talk about these. So I like to work with the ovaled form and then use that dissected space. So figure out where the decoration is going to sit. So where a gridded space sits next to another color, and how, like on the left picture, how the vine really kind of can move around the form a little bit more free falling and sort of guide the viewer around the actual functional form. And then using sgraffito to sort of create this, like, again, a different kind of dissection where I'm just taking these patchwork sections and then having the vine run around and underneath and over. So really interested in this idea of things moving underneath, and then these other things also doing that at different levels. So trying to create some kind of complexity of depth and movement around the form. And then the shapes, these shapes are wheel thrown and stretched, just because people think these are cut, but they're, I actually throw these and then stretch the clay. So I can get these sort of like textile. I like the idea of like an ambiguous shape, a shape that doesn't actually necessarily speak to any specific shape, but can be like kind of like a piece of fabric, a little bit ambiguous. In this one, there's like, I'm really trying to push that underneath and then coming up over the top with a really flat, with real flatness though. So creating depth within the visual aspect of the form as opposed to the structure. And so I also wanted to say these are all hand painted. So the sgraffito is hand carved and the decoration is applied through multiple layers using wax resist. I'm also interested in how decoration can wrap around a form and change the shape of the form. I just wanted to show this as an example of like an initial layer to what then becomes many, many layers. So this is actually done with tape resist. And then I'm waxing these like flower shapes. And then the next layer would be the red and the vine and then the white. So this form of stacking bowls is something that I come back to over and over again because I'm really interested in how things line up and how to dissect that shape. And then when you take it apart and put it back together, how that works in terms of function. So kind of like I'm trying to, when I can, kind of put in challenges to function as well as how decoration engages with that. I made this series of flower forms that I'm really obsessed with the garden and that's the space that we can create for butterflies and for animals and insects. And so I wanted to make some forms that were specifically for flowers and kind of in honor of the garden. And so I started making these at this point, making these flower forms, and it gave me the opportunity to be a little bit more playful and a little bit more sculptural. These are wheel thrown, except for the tubes on the left side. Every part is wheel thrown, but I was able to sort of alter they're wheel thrown and actually slab built, some of them, but alter kind of the direction of the form. So then at this point, in 2016, I had a chance to have a solo show at Anna Leon's gallery, which is part of Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. And so I had this entire gallery space to work with. So I really wanted to see what would happen if I worked with a larger scale in my work and what that would do with the decoration. And so I did call these embodiments, garments and clay, because I was kind of thinking about how the decoration wraps around these, what I called sort of torso-sized forms. And I wanted to show this image on the right to show you the scale of the work. One of the things I've still very enamored with is coil building. So all those forms are coil built, and I'm really obsessed. I've never worked with a Korean ongi potter. I've just seen videos of it, but I was obsessed with learning from that, the technique of coiling. And so I had to have fallen in love with coiling. And then had an admiration for this Korean ongi tradition, which is so beautiful and resonates in terms of these sculptural forms that are actually functional vessels that hold this food that's been in this culture for forever, as well as watching these. Also, never have worked with West African potters, but have watched a lot of videos and looked at a lot of work of women making these beautiful coil pots. And the part of that is, part of my interest in that is that in terms of growing up and learning about ceramics and the history of ceramics, having not really learned that much about African pottery and how beautiful and important that tradition is in ceramics history, and really wanting to sort of resonate in that right now, and kind of really have a chance to sort of sit within my admiration for this type of building and these pots. So these are all coil built. And one of the things I realized from the show was that what I was doing after the fact was that I was kind of putting the decoration that I was putting on my pots on these larger forms. So it was this kind of interesting for me, this transition of working larger, but then that comfort level that I still had around the surface decoration. So maybe not making as big of a leap with the surface, but learning a lot about form. And then, like, because of the size of my kiln, all of these forms are as big as I can fit my kiln, as I could fit in my kiln. And sometimes I would like almost not get it right. My lid of my kiln, you know. So this is a stacked form that I made so I could sort of see what it would be like to work even larger. So this is a show, Central Pedal Speak, and I think this show I start to work with. I'm working with a number of different types of forms. And in this work, I intended to push the depth of the decorative layers while still expressing the fundamental materiality of clay to further exploit my technical and expressive vocabulary of interrelated pattern, transitions of color, spatial dissection, and chromatic and textural contrast to create three-dimensional canvases that are objects of beauty, but also expressions of it. And so in this show, I wanted to show this piece for the scale, but I also wanted to, I've always also been influenced by these Jomon pots, this like clayness of these pots that it maybe hadn't been in some of my wheel thrown work. And I really wanted to sort of like explore some different kinds of ways of working with clay. So I made these wall pieces in the, which are the example of that one that you saw me in. I just also want to show you the transition of how these are decorated. So from left to right, the bare clay, and then the layering, how I'm layering with the surface using tape resist, and then literally painting the wax on in layers. This is just, I don't have an example of the painting, but using a brush to paint the layers on. This is a detail. In these wall pieces, I really liked how I could I learned how I could really kind of engage in the ceramicness of this process in a way by allowing the glaze to crack, to show its ceramic quality, which is something that's very different from making pots. Yeah, so these are all made in sections. And then in this show, there are the wall pieces. There's these on the left, this is a vessel that's wheel thrown and then coil built on top of it. And then I had these wheel thrown cups. So I wanted to have all of the forms that like a sculptural form, a functional form, and then these vessels that actually don't have a glaze inside. So they're not like fully functional, to sort of express this equity of form within the same space, but tie them together using the decoration and color. I like this idea of like the talking about the sculptural scale of the work as being torso size, so relating to the body, and then the cups kind of relating to like the heart shape object, meaning like that literally the heart inside of our body, like that size. and that the cup becomes something that can move in and out of one's home, where a sculpture does that very differently. A cup can enter into your home and then it goes into your cupboard, and then it goes, you drink from it and you share it with other people in a very different way that a sculpture does, in terms of my experience with the way I build sculpture. And so this is just a gallery view. And this is actually a fully closed form. So this print is a print that I grew up with, and it was in the apartment that I grew up in New York City, and I found this in my mom's apartment, and I just took it because I wanted to sort of, again, like kind of resonate with this image. Was really powerful to me. I think because I grew up with it, but also this like dissection of space, the horizontal female figure, the Black female figure, the quilt. And I saw all these things that I'm thinking about. This wax cloth that I'm really interested in because of how it moves from Holland to Africa, and like that history. And then Charles Burwell is this artist that someone recommended to me. And when I saw this work, I was like, wow, this is right. This is a kind of exactly what I'm doing, but a lot more complex. The language of the shape and the shapes and the relationship between shapes is much more complex. So I really wanted to sort of see what would happen if I could sort of amp up the complexity of the shapes in my work. So I started making these cutouts, and I use them as I trace them onto the form, and then I fill that shape in with wax. So it is somewhat of a stencil. So I created these plates made from these stencils, but they're just traced and then the wax. And so this is a combination of tape resist. I just wanted to show you these like a little bit more up close. And so there's sgraffito with the grid, and then there's tape resist with those stripes. And then, so you can see with those red shapes, you can see the grid underneath. So my work really doesn't, like, often I just feel really frustrated with how my work is photographed, because often you can't see the way that these layers show through the past layers. So there is like this build up, as opposed to like what sometimes people think my work is a decal, or like there's other things that are for me as complex in terms of like seeing what's behind the other thing, sort of this like windows into other things, losing layers, loss of things in this, as well as finding things in this process. I'm also accentuating the shapes by adding clay. Like on this one, I add clay to the edges to really accentuate the form. And so I'll just go through these a little quicker, so there might be time for some questions. I use these tumblers as a way, these are sort of my test tiles. I do also have test tiles, but then these are my second rendition of test tiles, and these often lead to larger bodies of work. And I really love I love the combination of functional and sculptural vessel, kind of weaving back and forth between each other. And so embodiments, so these are the pieces that are in the show, Concepts of Clay, at the Clay Art Center. So you can also see these, well, you're seeing them here, but this body of work was in the show at the Clay Center that we are all in right now. And so this is a forward and back, this is the front and back of these pieces. And I really wanted to see what would happen if I kind of pressed the idea of the complexity of the surface, as well as the figure, abstract ideas of the figure. In this, like the black sgraffito, I think also of this duality of night and day. So that like that color, the way that you see things at night, the washed out color, but then there's a crispness that you get in that light, especially in moonlight. There's like a jumbled, like conversation within some of the surfaces of this, and then the sgraffito kind of weaves through it. And so I just wanted to show you some of the process of how these are done. So I start with the red clay, and then I actually put down a black, like a thick black layer of slip or underglaze, and then I build off of that. So the red clay was the starting point as a darker layer, and then I wanted an even darker color behind all the color. And then there's tape, and then sgraffito. And then, like, if you can see on this past one, that these were going to be the tops, and they were terrible. Like, I couldn't. So I decided to sort of I started to bring back some of that work that I was doing in graduate school, that like manipulation of clay for the tops. And it kind of reminds me of hair, or like chaos of like thoughts, or so I'm going to skip this because it's not important. Oh, there it is anyway. It's just showing you sort of how the wax is done. And then passages is and I'll show you this quick video of the space so you can kind of see the scale of the work, or how it sort of sits in the gallery. Someone suggested that this would be interesting to people. I hope it is for you. And so here in this show, it's I call it passages because it's work that I made in 2021 as well as work that I made in the past. Like, so as you can tell, I've shown some of this work before. And then the tumblers, always trying to have something functional in the show. So these are my new test tiles 2021, and trying to like think about new palettes. These are all free-handed, so I'm going back to freehanding my designs, but taking along with that some of the complexity that I was getting with those paper stencils. So these are all these are all free-handed in terms of the shapes of what you're seeing, but I'm like able to visualize a little bit more complexity. And so this is a new piece. I made 3 new pieces in 2021 in terms of sculpture. I'm still making lots of pots, but this is sort of a new piece with a new palette and a new idea around shapes. And then I just want to go through Pots on Wheels. So I'm a co-founder of Pots on Wheels. We are a nonprofit mobile outreach program, and we are mainly based in the New England area, although we have traveled farther than the New England, but we're mostly based in that area. We started a Kickstarter in the help of 100 potters throughout our community who donated work. We were able to raise, I think, $25,000 to buy this truck and build it out so that we could take this programming to different communities. And a couple of those communities are Girls Inc., the Girls and Boys Club, there's the Care Center in Holyoke, and a number of other programming that we've done. We actually have an NEA grant that we have had to put on pause, but is still in place. When we can go back to doing programming, we are fully committed to bringing programming back to the community. So if any of you out there, like, I think that's one of the things that we've really wanted to do recently, is to make sure that everyone knows that we're still on this. We're really committed to continuing this programming. And this cup latch, I think, is really interesting because what it is, it's this idea of where at one place that we go, people make cups, and then they can take a cup that was made by a past place that we've gone. So there's this, I really love this idea of equity of experience, equity of creativity, equity within the arts, that when you get a chance to work with clay, there isn't any kind of monetary obligation. All you're doing is participating in the event. And so when you do that, you get a cup, but you also are either decorating or making a cup to put back in the cup latch, and then we go to the next place. And so these are just some of the pictures of that. This is the actual truck. Sometimes, usually these shelves are full of cups, but this is actually at Entangle where we have shows of artists' work. And this is an example of like programming that we're doing. And you can see at the very bottom, all the cups that from the cup latch that the kids can either have decorated or made, or can take and give back a cup. And these are the kids with their cups. And then finally, I have a quote from Anais Nin. We do not grow absolutely chronologically. We grow sometimes in one dimension and not in another, unevenly. We grow partially, we are relative. We are mature in one realm, childish in another. The past, present, and future mingle and pull us backward, forward, or fix us in the present. We are made up of layers, cells, constellations. Anais Nin. And thank you, everyone. I think I'm gonna stop sharing. Regina, is that a good idea? I think so.
That's fine, Adero. Thank you so much. If you're ready to stop sharing, that's absolutely fine.
Okay.
That was wonderful, very in-depth. This was a really excellent presentation. We've had a lot of comments in the side there, if you can catch them before you go. Thank you for joining us, everybody. It was wonderful to share the evening with you, and hopefully, Adero, maybe we can have you at Clay Art Centre in real life when we get back to normality.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, just say thank you. I didn't thank everyone. I see all of you. I really appreciate your kind words. I really am so appreciative that of you being here. I'm looking at the words as if you're all faces, but I wish I could see your faces. And Sana, I really wish that our paths cross again soon, and as well as all the rest of you. I hope that if our paths cross soon. Thank you, Clay Arts Center, for allowing me to share my story with everyone.
It was wonderful to have you. Thanks so much, Sana, and good night, everybody. We'll see you back here again soon.
Okay. Bye.